I'm glad he brought up millennials. Our total marketing reach with millennials has gone up about 60%. Our overall website visits have also been up about 17%. The way that we can actually change things
Did you get my
in order
email from
to
Thursday?
focus.
Did you guys read that email? I think that our primary objective here is
changing
focusing
initiatives.
on next quarter.
Fight!
Our total marketing reach grew by 15%.
What I'm
Overall
looking
website
for
visits
is
went up
game-changing
7%.
performance
In organic search traffic,
about investing in
55%,
strategy
especially
and using
within
our
the
core
team demo, which is really our core demo.
Synergy.
We need to focus on our creative development. That's what mainly brought our total marketing reach up by 16% last year.
Good point, Amanda.
Thank you.
You know that our goals for Q4 are about the roadmap and the diversity and the progress of our company. Our company, if it's about anything, we really represent #progress. It's really where we draw our core values. Brittany, do you mind taking notes on this so we get everything down?
Oh, you know who's really great at taking notes is Josh.
Wait, what?
Fatality. Victory.
Hey, PJ, we need to talk about the quarterly sales report. Your team is down about 60% from last quarter.
Yeah, just give me like 1 second. Okay.
Guys.
Got nailed right in the balls.
Bro, that was hilarious.
PJ, this is a huge deal. I have to take this to the CEO. I need to understand, like, what happened.
Whoa. You need to chillax a little bit. You're freaking us out. You're acting kind of insane. I think it's that time of the month.
Fight!
If you're talking about the time of the month when I do your performance review, then you're right, and you're screwed.
Finish him! Victory!
Hey guys, this is Stephanie. She's the newest member of our team.
Hi.
Hey Stephanie, how's it going?
Good, nice to meet you. Got a load of this chick.
Fight!
What is this woman staring at?
It's like if Ann Taylor didn't try.
What is her problem?
I'm the female on the team.
Ugh.
Is she replacing me?
You should be threatened by me.
I love her suit, just kidding.
Watch out, eyebrows. Hi. I'm Stephanie.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
It can kind of be a sausage fest in here, so I'm really happy to have another woman in the room.
Thanks.
Flawless victory.
Yes! Feminism! B? That was fucking hard.
So to start us off, Jessica, what exactly is a feminist fight club?
So I'm in a real feminist fight club. We fight patriarchy, not each other. And it was the inspiration for the book. It's basically a group of women that I've been meeting with since I began my career about 10 years ago. And we were all in really junior level positions, many of us assistants. I was a junior reporter at Newsweek. And we all kind of started butting up against what we would learn was sexism, but at the time we were like, is this just us? Like, do we just have shitty ideas? Is that why I'm not getting into the magazine more often? But we began meeting monthly at one of our members' parents' house because all of our apartments were too small to fit 12 people. And we would basically gather every couple of months and we would talk about our jobs and we would talk about the challenges we faced. And we would try to share tricks and tips. And we would pass these along to each other as time went on. And it still exists, we still meet.
I love that. So at what point did your individual Feminist Fight Club turn into an idea for this book?
Yeah, I mean, for a while I've been thinking that the club was so useful to me in so many ways, but the first rule of the club was we didn't talk about the club outside of the club. I mean, we always sort of joked it was tongue-in-cheek, but some of us were actually in jobs where we didn't feel comfortable having it be public that we were in a feminist consciousness raising group, essentially. And so there were members who really did fear that if that got out in their workplaces, they would be penalized for it. So we were very careful about not talking about it and not revealing who was in it. But I think as time has gone on, we're talking more openly about these issues. And in the book, the club is still anonymous, but we talk broadly about the tricks that we have used over the years and the tools that we have learned. And so I felt like I wanted to tell the story of this group I'd been involved in, but also we talk so much about gender issues and issues of inequity, but there's not always a lot of solutions. And as a young person, you know, we can fight against these structural issues, very real issues like the wage gap and the minimum wage, and we can fight for paid familial leave. But, you know, I'm 24, I'm just starting my career, like, it can feel pretty powerless to be dealing with some of this stuff, and like your only recourse is to write your local congressperson. So what I wanted to do was combine almost like a hipster handbook style Mortal Kombat with some of the research out there that exists around how we can fight back against gender bias, and hopefully, you know, deliver it in a way that will make you laugh, but will also be effective.
And now the first rule of Feminist Fight Club is to talk about it.
Yes, now we talk about the Fight Club.
So what are these sort of minutiae of subtle sexism that this book is aiming to offer solutions to?
Yeah, you know, it's not rocket science, and sometimes it almost sounds silly. Like, taken individually, the idea of a man interrupting you when you speak, or somebody, when you express an opinion in an authoritative tone, saying, is it that time of the month? Or, you know, having an idea that you put forward attributed to somebody else, losing credit for the ideas for your work. These are things that, you know, they can seem small, but I've heard it referred to as death by 1,000 small cuts. You know, they add up over time. And so that's what I'm trying to tackle here. And I think that by creating these kind of silly names for some of these behaviors, the man-interrupter, like obviously not every man is an interrupter and not every interrupter is a man. It's meant to be tongue-in-cheek. But women are actually interrupted at twice the rate of men, so there's truth behind it. And just like mansplaining has allowed us to call out this behavior that has existed arguably since the dawn of time, and I'm assuming this audience knows what mansplaining is, I think that sometimes these funny phrases can actually allow us to talk about and to call out really complicated issues.
Yeah, it's like man-spreading. It's really
Exactly.
entered the consciousness.
Totally. I mean, you know, it's only been the last 5 years or so that mansplaining as a term has taken off, and I think it evolved from the internet, and then Rebecca Solnit, the writer, wrote an essay about it. But now, like, we call this out all the time, and I think men actually realize when they're doing it.
So are there any moves from this guide that can, you know, help tackle a bully in the workplace, or maybe, you know, on a larger scale, like a Donald Trump type figure, maybe?
Yeah, so let's see. Donald Trump is sort of like a caricature of all of these things in the book. Like the menstruator, which is the guy who every time you express an opinion is like, is it that time of the month? Or what I call the lactahater, which is the man who thinks, or woman, as it may be, who thinks that because you're pregnant or because you're breastfeeding or because you may someday get pregnant, you like clearly can't possibly do your job or balance it all. And so there's some ways to tackle those things. There was a portion of this video that got cut out for space, but you know, some of these tactics are silly. You can say, when someone says, is it that time of the month? You can say, yeah, it's the time of the month when I'm about to do your performance review, and you're screwed. That's like sort of the funny approach. Or you can hit people back with research. Like, I always find data to be very effective in just shutting down an argument against it. So like with the lactahater, or however you want to say that, you can present research that actually shows that moms really do get shit done faster and more efficiently than people without children. Like, they don't have time to deal with crap. So when I was writing the book, I kept this old 1970s anthology on my desk. It was called Sisterhood is Powerful. It was written by Robin Morgan. And there's a section of that book called Verbal Karate. And it literally is just a list of statistics. The statistics are now very outdated, but I loved that idea because statistics can be your verbal karate. People can't argue with them. And so anytime somebody tries to argue against this stuff, I just try to hit them with data.
I love it. You also touch on this theme of gendered language in the book. You know, the language that's often used to describe professional women, like aggressive or bitchy or crazy. Words when we really think about it, we might not use to describe a man in a position of power. How do you think this sort of language impacts women on a larger scale?
Yeah, you know, these are double standards that women face. So Hillary Clinton is obviously assertive, but she's also referred to as aggressive. She's often referred to as ambitious, but not in a good way, in a pathological way. And, you know, this is a person running for president. Of course she's ambitious. Don't we want somebody with ambition who is running for this position? But what the research has shown is that these words can actually undermine women. And there was one study from the Women's Media Center that found that such language actually makes people less likely to vote or support a female candidate. So words actually really do have power. You know, things like shrill, like we constantly are talking about the tone of Hillary Clinton's voice. Well, actually, shrill is a word that's twice as likely to be used in the media to refer to a female voice versus a male voice. So some of these things, this is what I mean by the subtlety. Like, these are really subtle things, like perceiving a woman as bossy when she makes a demand. Would you ever call a man bossy? Probably not. But don't you want female leaders to make demands? Like, that's essentially the requirements of the job. So some of this is as simple as like watching our language when we talk about women.
Yeah, and I guess holding, you know, the media accountable when they use that kind of language.
Yeah, holding the media accountable and like checking ourselves. Like, a lot of this is really unconscious behavior, and men exhibit it, but so do women. Like, I have caught myself doing that very same thing, and, you know, taking a moment to acknowledge it and realizing it so you can correct the behavior. Like, I think a lot of it is about like checking yourself.
Yeah, and you have an entire section of the book that really addresses the way women unintentionally undermine themselves. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so, you know, there's been this argument for a long time in feminist circles around some of this behavior that we call self-sabotaging, women undermining themselves. And by asking women to correct those problems, are we actually putting the onus on them? Are we blaming them? Is it their fault? And my feeling is all of these things exist because we exist within a larger patriarchal structure where men have ruled. So over time, we've been taught that our voices are not as important. And we've learned to come off as humble. You know, we don't want to brag because we'll be perceived as unladylike or cocky or too self-promotional. And men don't face these things. But in one sense, in order to overcome that, we need to just push back against it. Like, we need to learn how to brag. We need to learn how to self-promote. And if we feel like a fraud when we walk into a room, there's this thing called imposter syndrome. This is when women or people of color or anybody who has the pressure of accomplishing a first feels like they don't belong there. So there are some really simple things that a person can do to overcome that. One of them is power posing. This is essentially when you stand in like a wide stance Wonder Woman pose. There's a famous TED Talk about it. And you literally stay that way for 90 seconds. And your testosterone levels go up, your stress hormones go down, and your confidence is raised. And so things like that, I mean, I've done it, I feel like a total idiot while I'm doing it, but like I've used it for pitch meetings, I've used it for speeches, I used it for a breakup once, and it can be really effective. And I don't think that my intention here is not to tell women they need to change their behavior, but that there are these really simple things we can do in the day-to-day while also fighting against the larger structures.
Yeah, at one point you kind of tongue-in-cheek suggest that we all learn to carry ourselves with the confidence of a mediocre white man.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what about that mediocre white man are we trying to emulate a little bit?
You know, something as simple as body language. Like even the way that I'm seated right now, like I'm kind of crouching I'm taking up a small amount of space. But like the man spread, like if I was a dude, I'd just be like sitting here like this. And so I didn't come up with that phrase, carry yourself with the confidence of a mediocre white man, but I did used to share a wall at my old job at Newsweek with a very confident white man. And I call him Josh in the book, that's not his real name, but I would just observe him, and I would observe the way he would pitch stories, and I would observe the way that even when he had no clue what he was talking about, he delivered whatever he was saying with such confidence that the people in the room believed him. And meanwhile, I would be like stumbling through this story idea that I had spent hours preparing for, but I didn't have that confidence. And so essentially, over time, that almost became a joke among my colleagues and I. We would be like, what would Josh do? WWJD. And we would repeat that to each other. And I would literally ask myself when going into a negotiation or when going into anything that made me stressed out or fearful, okay, what would Josh do? Like, how do I try to mimic that behavior? So I don't think it's about like telling women to act like men. It's supposed to be a joke. But asking yourself what would a man do in a certain situation? Like, that has worked for me.
And there's something powerful about just feeling like there's something that you can do in that moment, even if these larger structures, you know, aren't going away right now.
Right.
And, you know, you not only offer these little life hacks, but you also sort of speak to the power of women creating spaces for themselves and just sharing their experiences. Why do you think that's important? How does that help women?
Yeah, you know, in the second wave women's movement, there was a lot of talk about consciousness raising. And it was essentially the idea that by coming together and sharing their stories, women could come to realize that the problem was not individual, that actually the personal was political. And these were larger issues, they were collective issues. And if they were collective issues, then you could attack them together. And I guess I feel like we are more powerful together. And whether your fight club includes men or if it's just women, whomever is in it, if we're all fighting against these issues together, then we're likely to have more impact. And I think that sharing stories can actually lead you to understand that you're not alone in these scenarios.
So let's talk a little bit about men. How can men, those great male allies out there, how can they join this conversation in a way that's productive?
Yeah. You know, one of the things I've tried to do with the book is have it be humorous. And I think, like, I'm not a comedy writer. I had a lot of help from a lot of amazing women to come up with a lot of these puns, one of whom is in this audience here and was responsible for this video. But humor, I think, is a really great way to open up these issues so that people don't feel attacked. So, like, I was at a barbecue recently with a family friend, and it was all these middle-aged white guys who were Trump supporters. And I had an early galley of the book, and I had brought it to show my friend. I was not planning on taking it out because I didn't want to even get into it. But one of them saw it in my bag, and they noticed that on the front cover, it has an asterisk. I guess it's right here. Anyway, book is 21% more expensive for men. And it's not literally that because it would be illegal. I mean, so far. But it's meant to be tongue-in-cheek because that's the wage gap. And so this dude looked at it and he sort of, you saw the wheels turning, he like looked at it and then he looked at his friend and then he looked back at it and then you like saw this little thing happening and then he started laughing. And from that moment, he started flipping through the book. He thought it was hilarious. He was noticing things. He passed it to his wife and then it went around the table and every single person there, most of whom were men, began reading the book. So you are all very progressive millennial men in this audience. You're not middle-aged white guys voting for Trump, I hope. But but I think that humor is one way that I found to be really effective in engaging men in the conversation. But I also think that understanding that men are some of our greatest allies in this battle And there are a lot of really simple things that they can do as well in the moment to help these issues. So what you can do is you can turn to chapter 5. There's a PSA. It's a penile service announcement. You can tear it out, and it has 14 really simple tips for what men can do. And they range from, if you hear a woman being interrupted in a meeting repeatedly, you can interrupt the interrupter and be like, yo, can you let her finish? You can give credit where it's due. So I'm not going to sit here and accuse men of taking credit for female ideas, though that has happened. But what the research shows is that female ideas are frequently attributed to men without them taking credit. We just assume that a good idea must have come from a man. So what can a man do? He can correct that. He can give credit where it's due, and he's gonna look like a great, selfless person, and you're gonna get to have credit for the idea. You know, if you're in a hiring position, for every man that you interview, you also interview a woman and you interview a person of color. Like, there is no excuse in this day and age to not do that. So I think that recognizing that men are actually amazing, amazing allies in this battle and trying to encourage them to be part of the conversation. Long-winded response.
No, I think that's perfect. I think we can now kind of throw it to audience questions.
And thank you, men, for being in this audience.
Yeah, a lot of men in this audience.
Yeah,
awesome.
It's good. Like, us talking to each other, like, doesn't change anything, so.
Hi, Jessica. Thank you for being here. So, which particular women, historian that paved the way that you look up to?
You know, Gloria Steinem, clearly. Shirley Chisholm is another amazing one. There's a quote from her at the beginning of the book about how women must become revolutionaries and try to solve some of these issues on their own rather than waiting for the system to catch up. But I had the opportunity while researching the book, there's a section at the end about feminist fight clubs throughout history. And none of these groups called themselves feminist fight clubs, but they were underground guerrilla women's groups who did all sorts of amazing things. And you won't find them in history books because they were largely unknown. So I was able to learn about groups like the Sojourner Truth Disciples who fought for the rights of women of color in prison and tried to improve prison conditions. There's a group called the Brujas in the Bronx. It's a Latina skate crew from the Bronx, and they're trying to overturn patriarchal skate culture. You know, so from these really political things to smaller cultural things, I was very inspired by a lot of these different groups that I hadn't known about before and whose names you probably wouldn't even recognize.
Hi, Jessica. What advice would you give to women who are catcalled by men?
So another one of these underground women's groups I was talking about was called Witch, the Women's International Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell.
It's an amazing name.
And probably you couldn't get away with that name today, but Witch still exists, and it was founded by a woman named Robin Morgan, who has written a ton of books, and she's the one that wrote that book that I kept on my desk. Anyway, they would stage all of these hilarious, colorful protests. They released 100 white mice into a bridal fair in Times Square. They would put liquid cement in their purses, and in the 1970s, they would quickly walk into Playboy clubs, and they would go to the ladies' room, dump the cement, and clog the toilets. And one of the things that they would do, another thing, they would have these organized protests, but when they would get catcalled on the street, they would simply hold their finger out and they'd go, and they'd just stare at that guy with crazy eyes. And I love that because it's sort of a humorous way to scare the shit out of the dude. You could watch them close their legs and also deal with the problem. So that's one thing to try. Hope that swearing is allowed in this.
I think you're good.
Hi, in the book you list 8 rules of the Feminist Fight Club. Which of the rules resonates with you the most, and how did you kind of formulate the rules?
Yeah, so most of the rules really did come from my real Feminist Fight Club. Like, we didn't write them down in a list, but we talked about them. The one that I find most important is treating other women as allies, not enemies. And I think that women have a tendency to feel competitive with one another, and it's not our fault. learned behavior from years of being told that there is not room for an equal number of women in professional jobs or whatever it may be. I think that, I've felt from an early age this need to compete with other women, and I've had to really catch myself and try to correct my behavior. So trying to view other women as your allies, as part of the larger Fight Club, not as the competition and not as enemies, I have found incredibly powerful in my own life. And I think it's helped me get a lot further. Like, you have an army of women supporting you, and if you can get them on your side, then you're gonna be stronger.
And I think that's a perfect note for us to wrap up on. Thank you so much for being here, Jessica.
Thank you.
Yeah, and everyone should go out and start a Feminist Fight Club.